So there's a problem that was stated very early in the last 10 minutes or so, where you were like going to try to put it in some sort of syllogistic form. I don't think we really got there, but I think I might have a better understanding, which is there's a whole bunch of transcendental categories. And if those categories are to be made coherent and sensible, then they require a justification. And you believe that you've found that justification. This is a problem that I have with the coherent model of truth. And that is, you're absolutely right, Jay. Because the coherent model of truth is one where truth is coherent with a set of propositions. And one of the propositions that you're including is these things have a foundation. That is the proposition that I reject. I'm not saying it's false. I can't demonstrate that they don't have a foundation. I'm just saying there's been no demonstration that they do. I don't see any reason why these things aren't true in and of themselves, in much the same way that people would argue that God doesn't need a foundation in and of itself. To me, if there's no demonstration, there's no way to demonstrate that this could have been any other way, then we're on pretty good ground in saying the laws of logic have to be absolute, or at least it's a reasonable, not quite maximally certain inference from the direct observations and the fact that these tools keep providing us with what appears to be consistent understandings of reality. Now, you can construct a justification for anything. And this is why, if we're sitting at a card table, and full disclosure, I'm a magician, I can cheat at cards. And I deal out the cards, and we're playing bridge, and you get 13 spades. You get the perfect bridge hand. Now, within the context of our understanding of the world, you could make a reasonable conclusion that perhaps I cheated, especially if you know you're sitting there with someone who's capable of dealing out pretty much whatever they want, or seemingly dealing out whatever they want. And it would be easily argued that the worldview that includes Matt cheated would offer the best explanation, the most likely explanation for how you wound up with all 13 spades. But that doesn't tell us whether or not that's actually true at all. Because we know, at least a couple of times in actual bridge tournaments, the perfect bridge hand has been dealt, and there's no evidence of any cheating. We also know that it is possible as one of the many random outcomes of a shuffled deck of cards.
30 seconds, Matt.
It's more comforting to say, I don't know if he cheated or not, but boy, it sure would make a lot more sense if he cheated. That's completely independent from whether it's true, which gets us back to what I was saying earlier, that the belief that there's a God that serves as a foundation may be comforting, but I see no demonstration that it's necessary or true.
Really good statements there. The first thing I would point out is that when you said that we appeal to God to ease our discomfort, my first argument would be that is an appeal to emotion. That's not a valid argument. That's actually a fallacy to appeal to the fact that the people that believe this or go down this route are doing it because of psychological motivation. So I don't think that's a valid argument. I would say next that the idea that you have the ability to distinguish between the categories that are maximally certain, such as abstract numbers, etc., versus the things that are derived from induction, scientific experimentation, empiricism. The ability to make that distinction itself presupposes some true category once again. So while I recognize that you wanted to sort of qualify by moving into the category of maximally certain and not absolutely certain, that's fine. You can use whichever terms you want to use. From my perspective, it doesn't matter to me, because I don't believe that you would be able to have, in the pragmatic perspective, a justification for any kind of truth whatsoever. In fact, the whole system quite literally should lead directly into solipsism and total relativism. Now, I know that you don't necessarily accept total relativism because, as you said, we have a common world, a common something area where we can dialogue about these things and have the debate. So we don't believe in total relativism. However, in order to not believe in total relativism, again, assumes these categories, assumes these things that you seem to admit, but don't think that they necessarily presuppose or lead to any kind of a personal God. And I understand why you're saying that. But so I want to stress that I don't think the appeal to discomfort is a valid argument. I don't think that you have the ability to have even maximal certainty. And I don't believe that you can construct a justification for anything. So the example that you gave was a case where you could, you cheated at cards, et cetera, and somebody could build a case or whatever. When it comes to normative day-to-day kinds of activities or what you could call normative logic, that could be true. Yes, there's a lot of situations where we would have, through induction, limited amounts of certainty. But the strength of the transcendental argument, the strength of the argument that's being presented here, is that there are some things that are so fundamental that to deny them or doubt them, which theoretically one could doubt them, but to actually live or to actually consistently try to doubt them and not live according to them or not, debate according to them, would lead to such a fundamental breakdown of the coherence of one's belief system, or even the possibility of knowledge, the possibility of operating in the world, of predicating about objects in the world, of knowing things in the world, or doing science at all. Those types of things are so fundamental that I'm arguing, even stronger as an argument. They're maximally certain to whatever degree you want to posit. If you want to say absolute or not absolute, that's fine. It doesn't matter to me. I don't have a problem using the terms of warranted beliefs or highly warranted or maximally or whatever, because really those are just humanly derived terms that are trying to describe the strongest level of certainty possible. So I believe that those kinds of transcendental categories are not only maximally certain or necessary, but that they don't operate independently. They actually presuppose and interact with one another, which is kind of why I started the debate talking about the three branches of philosophy which make up a worldview. These things all, I believe, cohere and kind of presuppose and are tied together with one another. For example, it wouldn't make any sense to talk about the past experiences and can I have a rational belief in past experiences if I didn't believe that there was a self that had those experiences. It seems that these two things kind of go together. Being able to predicate about objects in the external world, right, kind of assumes that objects in the external world have identity over time, right? That I can pick out one object amongst many objects, and so that's the problem of the one and the many, right? So any kinds of examples like this tend to, I would say, kind of assume all these transcendental categories together, even if we're only focusing on maybe one area here or there. Maybe we're only talking about linguistics. A lot of modern philosophers, P.F. Strawson, Carl Otto Appel, they've done a lot of work in transcendental arguments as they apply to language and linguistics. How many things, it's kind of amazing how many things we presuppose just in communication, just in subject-predicate relations and sentences, just in trying to communicate that information to another bunch of gray matter. The intricacy, the complexity in this is fascinating. It's phenomenal, actually. And so what I think is so strong about this argumentation is that we're not just arguing that it's a kind of a model up here in the abstract that's pretty cool, like some big World of Warcraft scheme that we've invented that really doesn't have anything to do with the external world. I'm saying that no, when I have a friend who's a rocket scientist, he's done contract work for NASA. He designs Blackhawks, right? He talks about the amazing complexity of the algorithms that he works with. Now, I'm not a mathematician, right? I know about math theory in terms of philosophy, but I don't do the abstract, calculus that he does to how to build, Blackhawks, right? But to him, at least in his mind as an engineer and many other engineers and mathematicians who utilize math in engineering, is that they see the practical application of this very abstract realm into the here and the now. And if something's wrong in the equation, the Blackhawk's not going to fly. It's going to crash, right? So he has to be very precise. He has to be very clear in the way that he gets it all perfectly right. And so it's not just in the realm of the abstract, it's also very present in the here and the now. And that's just mathematics. So what I think, if we reorient our perspective, when we look at the power and possibility of transcendental arguments, we're not just saying something theoretical, we're actually mapping this onto reality and saying that all of reality kind of presupposes this kind of a God, and that itself is the argument. So again, one could conceivably say I don't accept transcendental arguments, but I think that would lead to a bunch of dead ends, and a reductio is a valid argument. If we're led to dead ends when we deny this thing over here, to me, I think that's one of the strongest possible arguments. A couple other last points on Matt's last statements there was that I think when he says that coherentism, when he was listing coherentism, he talked about how your beliefs don't have a foundation. Well, I'm not trying to fault Matt as if he necessarily doesn't understand this. Maybe he misspoke, but the coherentism is not about foundations. It's actually about the coherence of the web of beliefs, right? So there's two models. The foundationalist model is like self-evident maxims, and then beliefs on top of the self-evident maxims, and then beliefs that lead to further beliefs that lead to further beliefs, right? So that's foundationalism, and it has foundations. we don't have that model, right, when it comes to webs of beliefs and when it comes to paradigms and worldviews that are justified in terms of coherentism. So that's because if I'm thinking about logic over here in this arena, maybe I'm talking about the laws of logic, that's not disconnected from who I am. That's not disconnected from my belief in God. It's not disconnected from ethics, that we ought to be logical, that we ought to reason from premise to valid conclusion, right? So it's all connected in our view. And I think that's a better method, a better way of understanding truth, propositions, beliefs, claims, etc. So I would say that I think Matt's position, while he did ask some good questions, kind of misunderstood and made a couple logical violations there. And the response that, what if there's no explanation? Well, I would say that if we're here to debate, and if we want to debate theism, I would say that if Matt wants to say that there's all these things that he utilizes, but doesn't necessarily think that they're true in the external world per se, laws of logic and all that, truth with a capital T or whatever, I would say that Matt's being arbitrary. And if Matt can be arbitrary, then I can say God just is, right? So if arbitrariness is allowed, if we can be ad hoc, then I think that the debate is over, because that would be a violation of the laws of debate. But of course, we don't believe that we can be arbitrary or ad hoc. And so therefore, we can't just say, well, the laws of logic just are. I forget Matt's phrase. He said that truth is what maps up to reality, or belief that conforms to reality. That's a metaphysical claim, right? That's a metaphysical statement about the external world, right? Now, I know Matt's would only say that, well, that's maximally certain in a pragmatic sort of sense. Okay, fair enough. But it still doesn't work to say it just is, because once we've admitted it just is, then that's being arbitrary and ad hoc.
So, as a skeptic and somebody who essentially teaches about skepticism, I often get asked this thing about, can you be too skeptical? And of course, my answer is no, because what they're generally be talking about there is not skepticism, it's cynicism. Skepticism is an ideology, in an ideological sense, is I want my internal model of reality to match the reality I experience as best as possible. And so you've a couple times now suggested that my worldview should lead me down a path of total skepticism. Well, I am a total skeptic in the sense that I have doubts about everything. I am not absolutely certain about anything, but that doesn't mean that I don't have reasonable confidence in things that are based on the foundation of logic. Now, if we're going to have the conversation about what's beyond logic, which is apparently what we're trying to do, criticizing the view is just one more attempt to say, oh, there must be a foundation. Well, where's the demonstration that there must be a foundation? What are the consequences if there's not a foundation to logic?
But the argument is that you don't have a basis or ability consistently to appeal to logic itself, setting aside the justification of whether...
I have the same basis everybody else does. I'm convinced that it is reliable, as are you. The difference between us is that you are convinced that you found why it's reliable. That's not.
But that was why I asked the question about induction, right? So induction, and saying that you're convinced about it, it would presumably mean that you think that it works, right? It's pragmatic.
Yeah, it works. We both agree with that. So does pretty much everybody else on the planet for the entire...
Saying something works is a value judgment, right? That you're using another category to try to say that that's why this thing is true, but ultimately that would be circular.
Yes. So the whole thing is I've acknowledged a presupposition. How on earth is it as a counter to me to say, oh, you're presupposing?
Because on the worldview that you have, those kinds of things shouldn't exist.
That's absolutely not true. So this is where we're always going to get in trouble. You make an assertion about my worldview and about what shouldn't exist. My worldview is that I accept this because of a demonstration of its continued reliability.
That's called induction. And that's not a justification. That's just saying that it is, right? So in logical justification, that was why I pointed to Hume all the way up to Quine. They still say that this is not a belief or a view that can be justified.
Yes, and I agree. I see no justification. You're asserting there is a justification. And when I ask for what it is, you're just asserting that, well, my worldview collapses without it. And you even asserted that these sorts of things shouldn't exist. Stop. You should assert these sort of things shouldn't have existed in my worldview. Where's the demonstration that my worldview should not include things that are just true, or better yet, that are reasonably presupposed because of their continued demonstration of efficacy?
Because that would be being ad hoc and being arbitrary. And I'm saying the justification is that in a world where there is a God, the doctrine of providence actually makes sense why there's induction and the regularity that's in nature.
I'm not aware of a world where there is a God. I'm aware of a world where there are people who are convinced there's a God and who are convinced it serves as a foundation.
Right here.
Right. And so where's the demonstration for that,
right
other than an
demonstration.
assertion? No, it's not. I mean, if we're just going to make flat out assertions, then you assert your rights. It's not an argument. You haven't presented a single argument for the entire thing. You've presented colloquial, kind of loose arguments, but there's not. The whole thing is you claimed that this shouldn't exist in my worldview, that logical absolutes could not be true under my worldview. The fact that you're presupposing that there is an explanation for why they're absolute, rather than just recognizing that they are.
That would be being arbitrary and being ad hoc, and typically in debates that's not allowed.
It's wow.
Hey, Jay, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay. It's not ad hoc because I'm not offering an explanation for how they are. I'm not even acknowledging that there could be an explanation for how they are. There's been no demonstration that they require an explanation. So it's not ad hoc in that sense because ad hoc would be providing a justification for something. I'm not providing a justification for it. I'm saying I don't even know that there could be or that there is a justification for it. Do you see how that's not ad hoc?
Well, I mean, you can say that that's not ad hoc, but I don't see how it's not, because typically when we talk about in the domain of epistemology justifying beliefs and justifying claims, it requires some kind of explanation. Now, you can do that. I understand you're doing that, you're saying that, but I don't think that that's a coherent answer, and I think that you're led to that conclusion because of the beliefs in the rest of the system, because it would require the admission of other things that are not compatible with the other beliefs that you have, namely the atheistic agnostic type views.
Let me try this another way. How could it possibly be an ad hoc explanation to say, I am not aware that there is or needs to be an explanation?
Because that's being arbitrary. It doesn't need one.
Right? I asked how is that?
So let me frame it this way. So there's disciplines that are called meta disciplines, right? Meta ethics, meta mathematics, meta logic. These are real disciplines that people study. Now, one could say that they're not real disciplines and dismiss it or whatever. But when we talk about giving a justification or giving an explanation for things or explaining how they could be in the rest of one's worldview, I don't think that that's an invalid question. And you've said that you don't believe that it needs a justification. You can say that that's not arbitrary, but to me it sounds arbitrary. On the worldview where God exists, there's regularity in nature because of providence, because God has set the world up to be regular. And that's how we can do the scientific method. That's how we can do logic. That's how we can do math. The world operates in a regular way. But when we don't have that, and we just say that we only have our immediate sense experience, we only have what's pragmatic, then we're led to these foolish conclusions.
Okay, I'm a fool. Jay, do you believe I have $1,000 in my wallet right now?
I don't know.
Do you believe that I don't have $1,000 in my wallet right now?
I don't believe either claim.
Okay, thanks for refuting your own point from a moment ago.
Correct, but that's at the normative level of interactions and not at the paradigmatic level.
And that's special.
See, that's two
and
different
that's special
things.
pleading.
That's two different things. No,
Yeah,
that's what I've been arguing. That's
pleading.
not special pleading, because the whole time I've been arguing for transcendental categories and arguments, not normative logical claims.
Yeah, it's called special pleading. You're claiming the transcendental arguments are special, so they don't have to apply.
You just said a minute ago that they're presupposed and that they're different.
I said that they're presupposed. That's with respect to whether or not they can be justified, not whether or not they are fundamentally different and whether they follow. Like if you everything is derived from logic once you presuppose that as the foundation.
Don't you think that if I deny the laws of logic, that's more fundamental than whether I'm wrong about the $1,000 in your pocket or Lil Wayne living next door to me? Isn't one of those more fundamentally damaging to a worldview?
Yes.
Then you admit the point. That's the whole point. that I'm making about what a transcendental is and why it's so more fundamentally paradigmatic.
I agree that two things are different. I don't agree that your explanation. Oh, sorry, I'm getting it. Time to take the trash out. I don't agree that your claim that because they're different, they're no longer subject to reason or the sort of epistemic warrant. The fact that we presuppose something is because we can't justify it. Currently, maybe you're offering a justification, and a justification without any epistemic warrant.
No, I'm not. It does have epistemic warrant.
Okay.
I mean, the epistemic warrant is the arguments I've been making for the last 2 hours. Tanner Terry, $5. Matt, would you agree that meta-level discourse deals with justifying presuppositions, or while normative-level discourse does not?
I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm getting the echo thing again. Meta-level discussions are about understanding and attempting to justify whatever the normative level is. I mean, that's the whole thing.
Or the meta level themselves.
Okay.